Captain Atlas, my sensors are picking up a ton of news chatter. So where exactly are we focusing on today?
That is the perfect question to start with, BrickBot. Before we can understand what is happening, we first have to figure out the who and the where. So let's get our bearings and meet the key players.
Okay, take a look at our map here. You can see these three countries are pretty far apart from each other. But in the world we live in today, geography doesn't stop their actions from having a huge impact on one another.
First up, let's talk about Iran. It's a very large and powerful country right in the middle of a region known as the Middle East. It has a long, rich history and a lot of influence on its neighbors, not to mention the area's massive oil supply.
And right nearby, in that same region, we find Israel. Now, it's a much smaller country, but because of its location, it finds itself at the very center of a lot of really important events in the Middle East.
And then, way across the Atlantic Ocean, we have the United States. The U.S. is a global superpower, and it's also a very strong ally of Israel. That means it has deep political and military connections to the region, which makes its involvement a really critical piece of this whole puzzle.
So, we've got our key players on the board. Now, let's dig into the real heart of it all, the big disagreement that's driving this entire conflict.
My circuits are buzzing. I'm so curious. Why are they disagreeing so much, Captain? Everything I see in the news makes it sound incredibly serious.
Ooh, it is very serious, BrickBot. At its very core, this whole thing is about national security and one of the most powerful technologies humans have ever created, nuclear tech. The big question is, who should be allowed to have it and what should they be using it for?
And that question leads us to two completely different stories. On one side, you have Israel and the United States. They are extremely worried that Iran might be secretly trying to build nuclear weapons, which they see as a major threat. But Iran insists that's not what's happening. They say their nuclear program is only for peaceful things like creating electricity and for scientific research. This deep distrust is really at the heart of all the tension.
And unfortunately, this disagreement has spilled over into a new type of conflict, one that looks totally different from the wars you might read about in history books, all because of modern technology. You know, a huge part of this new way of fighting is the use of drones. So what are they? Well, think of them as unmanned flying robots. They can be sent on really long missions to either gather information or carry out an attack, all without a single pilot on board. And this kind of technology can create a really dangerous cycle that just keeps getting worse. It's kind of like a chain reaction. For example, an Israeli attack on an Iranian facility might cause Iran to respond by launching its own missiles and drones. And that, in turn, could draw the U.S. in to defend its ally, Israel, making the whole situation bigger and more dangerous with every step. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This is all happening so far away. But a conflict like this creates ripple effects, kind of like a stone tossed in a pond. And those ripples can be felt all over the world.
That's what my logic processors are trying to figure out, Captain. It's difficult to connect a conflict in the Middle East to people who live thousands of miles away. How exactly does it affect us?
That is a really important question. Well, the first and most terrible impact is always the human one. As you can see, wars destroy cities and homes, forcing families to leave everything behind and become refugees. But the shockwaves don't just stop there. They travel through the global economy, shaking up financial markets and, as we're about to see, even affecting the price you pay for things like gas.
And here's one of the clearest ways it can affect people everywhere. Oil prices. The Middle East provides a huge amount of the world's oil. So when there's conflict in that region, it creates a lot of uncertainty. And that can make the price of gasoline and energy go up for everybody, no matter where you live.
And when you really understand just how devastating these impacts can be, it becomes so clear why the most important goal for everyone, for the entire world, has to be working towards peace. The main tool we have to try and stop wars is something called diplomacy. Really, all that means is talking to each other. It's a long, hard process of communication where leaders try to find some common ground and solve their problems with words instead of weapons. It's all about building bridges, not blowing them up.
So yes, the disagreements are incredibly complex, and the technology involved in conflict keeps getting more advanced. But the one thing that never changes, the one goal that we should always aim for, is finding a way to build a lasting and stable peace.